Hi, world. It's been a long time coming, but yes, it's me again, and welcome back to the Tabbed Review. So, we left off with young Elphaba, who was finding her way into her new family. Granted, she was 2.5 at the end of that, but in time, right? Part 1, taking the train to Shiz. So now we're in Galinda's perspective. She's 17. So if Galinda and Elphaba are around the same age, then this would be 15 years later from the first part, canonically. Galinda's sitting on the train on its way to Shiz, and she's letting her thoughts wander, thinking about her chaperone, Amma Clutch. So all young girls in society, in high society, have a chaperone. This is just kind of an older woman that's around to make sure they don't get into trouble and to kind of handle their business for them. I learned this too. Amma Clutch stepped on a rusty nail and had to go seek medical help because of tetanus, which they call frozenness of jaw. Same difference. While Galinda hoped that Amma Clutch would suffer a little frozenness of jaw before seeking medical help so that she could be there with her to usher her into this new part of her life, I think differently. After sitting with this quote for a while, I wouldn't necessarily call Galinda I don't think this is a moral failing, right? I think she's just kind of a teenager. All of the brain is not really formed like that. I would just say this is more of a self-concerned teenager, and she needs more practice with empathy and all of the higher octane skills that an adult would have in a similar instance. I think that she's just a young girl at this point who assumes more than she achieves. No shade. She has all the time in the world. And she's a character in a book. Let's not forget that, because I feel like that's become a theme. So Galinda is actually the first girl from Pertha Hills to be accepted at Shiz. She was offered a 3-year fellowship to Craigie Hall, which is one of the women's schools. It's not coeducation. All of the other colleges are closed to female students. Yeah. Who else is on the train? So this is where Galinda meets Dr. Dillamond. It's just the two of them on the train. And he introduces himself. He's on faculty of biological arts, which I think is very fitting. As an animal, Galinda's first thought toward Dr. Dillamond is that he's a shabby dresser. He is a goat. So, what, is he supposed to be styling like that? I guess that I included this because it seems like Galinda is noticing his appearance, which she deems as less than satisfactory, but not necessarily the circumstances that would have informed that appearance or at least affected it. Because earlier in the conversation, he mentions that he paid twice as much to be in first class as Galinda did because the wizard has imposed sanctions on animal autonomy. So in order to ride a train, you have to be of a certain financial status to afford it. What I find interesting is that when Dr. Dillamond introduces himself, he talks about what he does, what he likes, what he's looking forward to. Galinda, on the other hand, talks about where she's from. She's from Pertha Hills. She's of the Arduena clan. She's from the northern part of Oz. So this kind of nod to one's background is something that I explained in my first video as leaning on one's ancestry. I guess a different way to describe it could be adhering to the social code of explaining why people should respect you. Because this is from my highborn family, or this is why I'm better than the people from this area. You don't really lead with you lead with your credentials in this way. just because of the social structure. And that's something I found just as interesting in this part as I did in the first one. And I'm wondering how that will evolve as I go along. At the end of this encounter, Dr. Dillamond pronounces her name wrong. And Galinda not only disdainfully corrects him, but her inner thoughts are even more vitriolic. She's just insulting a lot of his appearance. God, I feel... Okay, I'm just going to get this out of the way. I feel very protective of Dr. Dillamond. And yes, it is because of what happens next. And yes, there's not really a reason for me to be, but that's okay. This is how I am a reader. It's that I care about this amazing goat. Character in a book does not exist. It's okay. Because he's an intellectual, he's an academic, just trying his best in the face of economic disparity, in the face of students not respecting him, in the face of his other faculty members not respecting him because of things that the wizard is doing. Honestly, I was rooting for him so much at this point, and he holds a special place in my heart. And we've been talking about Dr. Dillamond for a really long time, and I'm okay with that. You might not be, so let's go ahead and move on. Due to the wizard's proposed bans on animal mobility, Dr. Dillamond and other animals would likely lose the opportunity to use public transportation or just the same things that everyone else in society is afforded at this point. A testament to Dr. Dillamond's kindness when Galinda, who is from the countryside with a lot of privacy, is overwhelmed by all of the noise and people and animals all moving around and less organization of the terminal. He calls the carriage for her, makes sure she's okay, and then he moves on with his day. I just thought that was really admirable. 2. Galinda finally arrives. So in the main hall, Galinda meets Madame Morrible. She has to communicate with Madame Morrible directly instead of just sitting and waiting while the Ammas, everyone except her chaperone, Amma Clutch, are discussing room arrangements. Galinda doesn't know that that's what they're talking about, and so she dismisses all of that as marketplace noise. This is a theme. Based on how comfortable people feel, Galinda is liable to look down on them. Maybe just judging their performance of society, but I don't think she would put it that way. Because no one was looking out for Galinda and her place in society, she can't level up and room with one of the girls who is richer, from a better family than she is. Instead, she's left with the last person, Elphaba. And as the girls are meeting each other for the first time, it's very brief, and Elphaba doesn't say very much because it's not her time right now, respectfully. We learned that Elphaba spent a lot of years in Quadling country. We talked about how Turtleheart was a Quadling from Quadling country, and it seems like her whole family moved back with him. When Amma Clutch finally gets there the next day or the day after that, she has no problem with Elphaba having green skin, which I respect. Again, it's a lot like Nanny in that way. Not only that, but she's totally willing to serve as her chaperone as well. Galinda, full of issues upon hearing this. Before Amma Clutch gets there, this is right after Galinda got assigned to the room with Elphaba. She makes up this story about how Amma Clutch fell off of a cliff that left her unable to care for anybody but Galinda. Like, she's unreliable to manage a whole dorm, and she needs to just stay with Galinda only. Okay. I'm going to pose a hypothetical. Hypothetically, I was talking for 20 to 30 minutes and was not recording. Yes, okay. Human error is that girl right now. All right. So part 3. I'm at part 3. Okay. We're officially back. Part 3. Galinda's social life. While Galinda decides that this is probably a better opportunity for her to make wealthier friends, she doesn't entirely ignore Elphaba. They don't really interact either. When they finally do, it's a bit of a difficult conversation for Galinda to participate in. I mean, up until this part, she is experiencing peer pressure, choosing peer pressure. She is coming to the realization that she's going to have to do real learning, which had never occurred to her. And when Elphaba and Galinda finally talk, it's about the nature of good and evil, which is hard for anybody to conceptualize, let alone a 17-year-old that's not really loving it here in university. It's been 3 months. They haven't spoken to each other, and it's all happening right now. They actually have a sweet moment where Galinda compliments Elphaba, saying that she looks as beautiful as a flower when she's wearing a really colorful hat. Because of green skin, flower, we get it. Elphaba is reading unionist literature and comparing its perspective with the other things that she's been reading while she's been at Shiz. Elphaba's trying to understand what it is her father actually believes in. And as a reader, I'm grateful for this because I need a little bit more help with the conceptualization of unionism. Elphaba is wondering about evil because she's grown up in 2 different places. Her parents are really different from one another. She's finally in university with a person that is starkly different, and they haven't even spent much time together. So she's mulling over the big stuff because she has the time to. Pertaining to evil, Galinda offers in this conversation that she's confident that evil exists, but that it's just boredom. And just to confirm kind of the murkiness of Galinda at this point, quote, Galinda didn't often stop to consider whether she believed in what she said or not. So she's engaging in the conversation, but just for practice, kinda. Elphaba is mulling over what she reads, something Galinda feels ill-equipped to do, so she's trying to direct the conversation to easier material. So it actually does get deep for both of them, which was something I was surprised by upon reading this. Elphaba shares first, saying that she has heard the original evil was born out of the pain that was felt by Oz when the fairy queen Lurleen left. In her idea, evil comes out of the space left when goodness is removed. So the presence of evil means that there had to have been good before that. And then the pain felt after Lurleen's departure caused people to perpetuate corruptness. Unfortunately, because the wizard came into power and anything reminiscent of the time before him is not really encouraged, there's considerable distance that the rest of the general public in Oz might feel from this viewpoint. And pertaining to what Elphaba said about how evil means that there was goodness once, Galinda agrees, saying that evil could be an implication of deity. Granted, she is repeating Elphaba's point here, but she is thinking. She's trying to, and that wasn't what we saw for the last 3 months of getting to know Galinda from her own perspective. This was when Amma Clutch was out, though. So when the chaperone comes back in the morning and Galinda thinks about the social implications of what she had done the night before, having a conversation, she decides to go back to her friends, the wealthy ones, the wealthy, also vapid ones. You kind of get the sense that Galinda is not necessarily at the mercy of seeking ways to advance herself, but that's the only thing she's ever done. So while she could think and mull over things, she doesn't really give herself the time to do that. Enter a situation that exploits that very weakness. Part 4, Madame Morrible's Poetry Soiree. Okay, we had a little bit of a lighting issue. My apologies. I didn't realize the natural light was as gone as it was, but we press on. Okay, so this part is... Okay, so not just because of the name, but this poetry event is crucial to the plot. Okay? First off, sections. So the attendees of the soiree come in this order. Animals on one side. They're only permitted to teach at Craigie Hall, the women's school, and they're sitting with the women. The other half of the room are the male professors and students, and we note that the male proportion of the students is meager in comparison to the female students. Now, that can apply a handful of things. I'm gonna hold that and see what happens. Madame Morrible arrives in stunning clothes in a flourish and explains the whole reason for the evening. There's a new poetry verse that's becoming more popular in the city of Shiz. It's called The Quell. And she thinks that this is so important to share because poetry illuminates life. Something that I can't agree with, but Madame Morrible is shady. Let's just get that said. So the reason she chooses this quell to read in front of the whole student and faculty of Shiz University is to quote anodyne the unrest in the capital. So the two quells are kind of long and there's a lot there, and I also want to do a separate video for those. I really like poetry. I know this has never been said before, but I actually really like poetry and like analyzing it. I know it's so fashion forward and different, and no one has ever said that literally ever in the world. And I want to keep this tight, so I'm not going to read both of the quells here because they're kind of long, but expect something in the future because I'm really excited to really get into these, to pick these apart, and I want to challenge myself to do that. And that way I can keep this plot focused and further the story. All right, let's keep going. Let's note the last line from both of the quells that Madame Morrible reads. So quell 1 ends with, "Bear down on the rod and spoil the child." It's familiar, but there's some key differences there. Don't worry, I'll talk about that at a different time. And then quell 2 ends with, "Animals should be seen and not heard." This we're a little bit familiar with. I am, after having watched the movie. I mean, who didn't watch the movie? Let's keep going. Based on the way the characters react to these two quells, Galinda especially, since this is her chapter, it is apparent that these were supposed to be understimulating or boring, so that by the time you got to the end sentence, you wouldn't hear it or wouldn't care nearly as much. Maybe the audience would only slightly register. And the last line that she even says is, "Animals should be seen and not heard," from quell 2. Upon hearing this, Dr. Dillamond is outspoken about his disapproval. He is the only character that calls this propaganda. And bad propaganda at that. I personally couldn't agree more. He and the other animals who were in attendance at the event leave at this point. And Madame Morrible is totally unbothered because good poetry is meant to offend. That part I can't agree with. And she seems even more shady. And once again, Elphaba tries to engage with Galinda about the difficult parts of the poetry that they just heard, but it's not the time, unfortunately. Given the setting, with so many of Galinda's classmates around and the people she's trying to impress, she is not intending to talk more with Elphaba about this, even though it is really layered and part of her can see that. In order to escape the conversation and the thinking involved, Galinda just turns to the closest person there. Part 5. Galinda meets a boy. That person that she turns to is Master Bach, who actually remembers Elphaba from Munchkinland. Though Bach recounts specific details about her upbringing, Elphaba denies ever living in Munchkinland. Since Galinda is faintly aware that the main reason Bach recognizes Elphaba is because of her green skin, for the first time, Galinda thinks she might not appreciate having green skin and being so recognizable. Imagine that. Notably, Galinda feels rejected in this moment because Elphaba is holding a piece of herself and not explaining it. Galinda doesn't care about hefty topics or really confusing concepts. She cares about people's story. She cares about people's family tree. That's the whole thing. And Elphaba is withholding the one thing that Galinda of the beginning of this chapter would have been obsessed with knowing. But this feeling of rejection is a considerable contrast from ignoring Elphaba for 3 months. Part 6. Dr. Dillamond's class. Dr. Dillamond, whom we will remember is a biology professor, shares the wizard has proclaimed bans on animal mobility. These bans restrict animal access to travel, lodging, and public service. Those animals coming of age can't enter professions anymore, meaning that they need to work in farmlands or wilds if they want wages. Galinda is vocal about struggling to grasp why the wizard might do this, but she also doesn't understand why Dr. Dillamond will be talking about this in biology class. Dr. Dillamond expresses a lot more patience than I would in this situation, and just says that if none of the animals coming of age can start work in typical professions, then what does that mean for his family, who worked so hard to put him through school to get him to the professor that he is today? Dr. Dillamond is even moved to tears as he's explaining this, but the class is not hearing any of it. He dismisses the non-understanding class, and Elphaba comes up to him after. Still in Galinda's perspective here, so all we notice is that Elphaba stays. We are out of there. This feels like a good time to talk a little bit of how I understand Galinda at this point in the story. Unlike the theatrical representation of Galinda, the literary representation is a lot more sympathetic to me. Yeah, she's still ignorant to many things, but it isn't necessarily her fault. I would say it's more of the function of a teenager. Feel free to respond. For Galinda, the poetry soiree has faded, and so has class with Dr. Dillamond. And then Elphaba starts a ruckus. Yes, I said ruckus. I am a literary genius, actually. Part 7. Elphaba challenges the head. Madame Morrible leads a lecture on early hymns, and Elphaba asks to discuss the quells from the week prior, saying they weren't in the best taste. Incredibly dismissive, Madame Morrible says that the poems were ironic. Basically, you don't get it. She says irony presupposes detachment, and Dr. Dillamond was just a victim of his own thin skin. So we are using the "it was just a joke" defense. Elphaba challenges her reasoning right there in front of everyone, citing the specific "animals should be seen and not heard" line. Madame Morrible is incensed by this, calling her ignorant and stuck. She even ventures to say that that line was true. Very telling. About a day later, Madame Morrible pulls Galinda aside. Let it be known that Galinda was in no way involved in what Elphaba had to say, but for some reason she's getting more attention because of what Elphaba said. Madame Morrible encourages Galinda to think about studying sorcery. She attempts to persuade her with the prospect of finding a new roommate, because sorcery students stay together and Elphaba is more interested in studying biology. This is something that Galinda has been very vocal about wanting for the entire semester. And then Galinda notices that Madame Morrible, for all of her upper class diction and fabulous wardrobe, she still seems sinister. And some part of her wanted to process this with Elphaba, but she was just unsure of how to start the conversation. I think that this shows a lot of change. These have been kind of flashes across her first semester at Shiz, but to me, she seems noticeably different. Even that she wanted to start a conversation with Elphaba. My thoughts. I read this chapter as some evidence that Galinda is not as easily liked as she seems, at least in the movie. That could be attributed to her performance of social practices. In every instance, societal norms require a performance. At least here, we get a sense of the stress attributed to it. Galinda is not so well off that she's a snob, at least according to the limited perception we borrow from her in this section. We see that she's less interested in advancing herself through education and more so the connections she can make with the higher ranking girls. As it pertains to Madame Morrible, we get a hint of her darker character at the earliest in the film, when she's manipulating Elphaba to get a magical reaction from her. Literary Madame Morrible is regal but imposing, even otherworldly, as she's likened each time to a fish or some other aquatic thing. This alludes to her depth and that of the ulterior motives that are starting to peek through, especially as we compare the two-ish one-on-one interactions she has with Galinda. I don't know where you are in your Wicked journey, but you know exactly where I am. Thanks for tuning in to the Tabbed Review, and until next time, watch out.